right now, sitting in your crisper drool, is a vegetable that passed through supply chains so staggeringly complex. I mean, it takes federal investigators up to 6 weeks just to figure out what field it was grown in.
Yeah, it's pretty wild when you actually look at the logistics of it.
It really is. And today we are looking at a microscopic parasite that essentially brought a massive chunk of the U.S. food distribution network to its knees. We're talking about that explosive, widespread Cyclospora outbreak linked to shredded iceberg lettuce that you've probably seen dominating the news lately.
Right, and the scale of this outbreak is what's truly dominating the data right now. I mean, when you look at the raw numbers and the geographic footprint, it highlights these vulnerabilities that go, way beyond just a single bad batch of produce.
Exactly. And to understand that footprint, we have pulled a massive stack of sources for you today. We're looking at official incident reports from the CDC and the FDA.
Which are crucial, yeah.
Super crucial. We're also pulling from some really deep investigative pieces published by Food Safety Magazine, AP News, and Consumer Reports. And to see how the logistics of this are actually impacting, public perception, we analyze the open source sleuthing and public sentiment from a bunch of massive Reddit threads.
Which provides a really necessary ground level view because, official federal reports only tell you what the agencies know, while the public reaction tells you how effectively that information is actually protecting people.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to look past the easy fast food jokes. We want to understand the biological mechanics of this parasite, unravel the staggering complexity of our modern food supply chain, and explore why tracking these outbreaks is so incredibly difficult.
It's a massive challenge for public health officials.
It really is. I keep thinking about tracking a foodborne illness, like trying to untangle a massive bowl of spaghetti, when you only have hold of one end of the noodle.
That's a great way to picture it. The fractionalization of risk in the agricultural supply chain is the core issue here.
Sure.
But to grasp how a supply chain becomes that thoroughly compromised, we really have to look at the biology of the bug itself first.
Right, the culprit.
Yeah, the mechanics of Cyclospora cayetensis create this uniquely difficult logistical nightmare for health officials.
Well, I noticed in the sources, and this was heavily discussed by the Reddit sleuths too, that Cyclospora is specifically a human parasite, right? Like it's carried by humans, not cattle.
That is a fundamental distinction.
Yeah.
When the public hears about foodborne illness, the default assumption is usually E. coli or salmonella.
Right, which you associate with, cows.
Exactly. Agricultural runoff from nearby cattle operations. But Cyclospora operates totally differently. Its life cycle is entirely dependent on human hosts. It's transmitted through human feces.
Oh, wow.
That's gross. So when epidemiologists find it on a crop like lettuce, it points directly to a contamination pathway involving human waste.
Which means what exactly?
Well, it usually means contaminated agricultural irrigation water or, frankly, inadequate sanitation facilities for the field workers who are harvesting the crop.
Okay, knowing that makes the typical advice of, just wash your vegetables feel a bit hollow.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I read in the CDC reports that washing produce does not guarantee the removal of Cyclospora. But my immediate thought was to question the mechanics of that. I mean, if it's just a physical contaminant on the leaf, why wouldn't water pressure and commercial vegetable washes just take care of it?
It really comes down to the microscopic structure of both the parasite and the plant itself. So Cyclospora is excreted in a form called an oocyst, which is essentially a tiny biologically armored egg.
Armored?
Basically, yeah. And these oocysts are incredibly sticky.
Oh, great.
Right.
Yeah.
Iceberg lettuce, if you look at it at a microscopic level, is not a smooth surface at all. It's covered in stomata, which are these tiny pores the plant uses for gas exchange, and all these deep cellular crevices.
So the bug just hides in there?
Exactly. The oocysts lodge themselves deep inside those crevices, so water pressure simply flows right over them. And the standard chlorine washes used in commercial processing facilities, they just aren't concentrated enough to penetrate the oocyst's biological shell.
So they essentially just bunker down inside the leaf structure itself. The CDC noted that the only biological weakness here is heat. Specifically, cooking the produce to 158 degrees Fahrenheit or 70 degrees Celsius will kill the parasite.
Which presents an obvious behavioral problem.
Right, because by definition, shredded iceberg lettuce is consumed raw. Nobody is cooking a side salad.
Exactly. The heat kill switch is practically useless for this specific commodity.
Wow.
And if a consumer ingests those live oocysts, the infection is treatable with specific antibiotics. But without targeted treatment, the biological cycle of the parasite can cause severe gastrointestinal distress. Symptoms like watery diarrhea, fatigue, cramping, total loss of appetite.
And that can last for a long time, right?
Without treatment, yeah, a month or even longer.
A whole month. That's brutal. But the timeline gets even more complicated before the symptoms even start because the incubation period for Cyclospora is massive.
This is the biological lag that makes Cyclospora an absolute nightmare for epidemiologists. With a pathogen-like staph or certain strains of E. coli, a person eats contaminated food and becomes violently ill within hours or like a day.
So the causal link is fresh in their memory. They know they ate that bad burger.
Exactly. But Cyclospora takes an average of a week, and sometimes over 2 weeks, to incubate in the human gut before any symptoms even manifest.
Okay, wait, if the incubation period is up to 2 weeks, how do they even reliably know what made these people sick? I mean, if you asked me what I ate 2 weeks ago, I'd have absolutely no clue. I'd fail that test completely.
Most people would. Epidemiologists basically have to rely on pattern recognition across hundreds of interviews, hoping to find some statistically significant overlap.
That sounds impossible.
It's really hard. And the timeline is even more stretched than just that 2-week incubation. Think about it. A patient gets sick, assumes it's just a standard stomach bug, right? And they wait a few days for it to pass.
Yeah, that's what I would do.
When it doesn't pass, they finally go to a clinic. The clinic runs a generic stool panel. But if that panel doesn't specifically screen for Cyclospora, they might get a false negative or just an inconclusive result, which means they need further specialized testing.
Oh man, so the clock is just ticking this whole time.
Exactly. And then, once a positive result is finally confirmed, the local clinic has to report it to the county health department, who reports it to the state, who finally reports it to the CDC.
Okay, so the CDC actually admits in their reports that they build in a standard assumption of a 6-week reporting lag between the day a person ingests the parasite and the day that case is officially logged in the federal database. 6 weeks.
Yeah, that 6-week lag means epidemiologists are always chasing ghosts. The data landscape just becomes incredibly muddy.
Yeah, I'll say.
You end up with this strained federal and state surveillance system trying to reconcile numbers that just don't match up. For instance, the official CDC numbers reported 1,644 cases and 94 hospitalizations linked directly to Taco Bell across 5 states, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and West Virginia.
Right. But the investigative reports we looked at show that Michigan's state officials alone reported over 4,000 cases of cyclosporiasis in that exact same time frame.
Which indicates that either the parasite is likely circulating far beyond the officially recognized cluster, or state officials are categorizing cases differently than the federal officials.
Either way, the public is left looking at heavily fragmented, messy data.
Completely.
And because of that massive data lag, public perception often points the finger at the wrong target, which brings us to how a major fast food chain became the face of a crisis they didn't actually start.
Yeah, Taco Bell took a staggering PR hit here.
Huge. Placer.ai data showed a 5.8% drop in their daily foot traffic almost immediately after the news broke. And there's even an Ohio man suing the corporation after he had a severe hospitalization.
Yet the FDA traceback investigation identified the true origin. They traced the contaminated lettuce back to Taylor Farms to Mexico.
Right.
And Taylor Fresh Foods released a statement clarifying that the source was a specific independent farm in central Mexico.
And this detail right here is what completely reframes the logistics of our food system. That specific farm in central Mexico represents less than 1% of the U.S. iceberg lettuce supply.
Less than 1%. It's crazy.
I am struggling to understand the mechanics of how less than 1% of a crop can physically spread fast enough to trigger a multi-state crisis. Like, if a farm only produces a tiny fraction of the lettuce, shouldn't the outbreak be highly localized?
Well, it goes back to your spaghetti noodle analogy, really. It's the mechanics of industrial processing.
Okay, walk me through it.
When lettuce is harvested from that specific farm, it isn't shipped straight to a local Taco Bell. It's trucked to a massive central processing facility. Thousands of heads of lettuce from dozens of different farms are funneled onto the exact same processing line.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, they're shredded and then dumped into massive communal water flumes to be washed together.
So the wash flume basically becomes the vector.
Yes. The water doesn't kill the oocysts, it simply disperses them. One contaminated batch of lettuce enters the flume, and the parasite is cross-contaminated onto the other 99% of the lettuce in that water bath.
Wow.
And then it is bagged and loaded onto distribution trucks heading all across the continent.
So the risk is completely fractionalized and distributed everywhere.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This dynamic created a fascinating pivot in public sentiment. The Reddit threads we analyzed showed users actively defending Taco Bell, calling them a scapegoat for a larger systemic failure.
Which is pretty rare. Corporate food safety crises usually result in severe public backlash against the consumer-facing brand.
Right.
So seeing a community defend the brand requires looking at the timeline of corporate action versus agency action.
Because Taco Bell actually acted on their own internal supply chain data. The Reddit commenters pointed out that the chain was proactive. They pulled shredded lettuce from their menus in the affected regions long before the CDC or the FDA officially identified that central Mexico farm as the source.
They likely observed localized spikes in employee illness or customer complaints, or maybe they received early warnings from their distributor and they just executed a menu change.
They were basically the canary in the coal mine. They sang first by acting on their data, so the public blamed the canary, totally ignoring the coal mine itself.
That's a really good analogy.
But as those Reddit users correctly noted, Taylor Farms is a colossal distributor. They don't just supply Taco Bell, they supply Chipotle, McDonald's, Costco.
Right. Now, the sources did specify that no Taylor Farms branded retail salad kits were affected. But the commercial raw product, that was everywhere.
Everywhere. Once you realize Taco Bell was just the first domino to fall, you have to look at where else that 1% of lettuce went.
And following the trajectory of that fractionalized 1% leads you directly to the expansion of the recall.
Yeah.
Because of those processing flumes, the contamination didn't stay confined to the 5 Midwestern states where Taco Bell initially pulled their product.
No, the recall quietly exploded to cover 27 states, more than half the country.
The secondary distribution networks took over. Consumer Reports conducted an independent analysis and tracked those contaminated lots.
And what did they find?
Well, between June 29th and July 16th, that shredded lettuce went into Walmart's supply chain, specifically their 12 and 24-ounce bagged market-side salads and their 8 and 16-ounce shredded lettuce bags.
And it also went to Sysco, which is the nation's largest food distributor. And Sysco is the backbone of institutional dining. They supply hospital cafeterias, corporate dining halls, major ballparks.
The sheer volume of product moving through Sysco means the exposure risk shifted from, people just choosing to eat at a fast food restaurant to patients eating a required meal in a hospital bed.
Which makes the communication of this recall absolutely critical. But Consumer Reports levied heavy criticism against both Taylor Farms and the FDA for how they handled the public notices.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of clearly naming the brands sitting on store shelves, the official recall notices used these vague internal corporate abbreviations.
Right. What's fascinating here is the tension between corporate damage control and public safety. The FDA notices listed MKTSD instead of Walmart's market side and SY instead of Sysco.
Okay, this raises a huge red flag for me. If Consumer Reports has to act as a literal decoder ring just so you know what MKTSD means on a federal recall list, isn't the safety system fundamentally broken for the everyday consumer? Like, who is that notice even written for?
It really appears written for the distributors and the retailers, not you, the end consumer. There is this deeply ingrained tension in recall logistics. Corporations prefer targeted, specific lot number recalls to minimize financial loss.
Sure, protect the bottom line.
Exactly. While public health, on the other hand, demands broad, immediate clarity. When jargon obscures the danger, the recall fails its primary objective. Knowledge is only valuable when it's accessible and understood by the public.
That failure in transparency is exactly why Consumer Reports took the extreme step of advising consumers in all 27 states to simply throw away all iceberg lettuce out of an abundance of caution. The data was just too opaque to trust.
And having to tell people to throw away an entire commodity across 27 states, that is a symptom of a much larger systemic issue. When you zoom out and look at the historical data, this outbreak is not an isolated freak accident.
No, not at all. The numbers show a steep upward trajectory. Domestic cases of Cyclospora in the U.S. jumped from 537 reported cases in 2016 to nearly 3,000 cases in 2023. And this current outbreak will undoubtedly push the 2024 numbers even higher.
A 6-fold increase in 7 years suggests a fundamental shift, either in the pathogen's behavior, our agricultural practices, or our ability to detect it.
Right. And experts from the University of Minnesota weighed in on this in our sources, and their conclusion points heavily toward the technology. So what does this all mean? Are our salads actually getting more dangerous, or have we just finally put on a stronger pair of glasses that lets us see the bugs that were always there?
The technological leap is definitely the driving factor here. Historically, diagnosing Cyclospora required a lab tech to physically look at a specially stained stool smear under a microscope.
Just manually hunting for it.
Yeah, attempting to visually identify a microscopic oocyst. It was incredibly prone to human error and false negatives. But now, the medical field uses CIDTs, or culture-independent diagnostic tests.
How do those actually change the diagnostic process? Like, what's different?
Well, CIDTs don't rely on visual identification at all. They use molecular technology, often PCR, to amplify and detect the specific genetic material, the DNA of the pathogen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they can process samples exponentially faster and with near-perfect accuracy. So a decade ago, a patient with a mild Cyclospora infection would have just been sent home with a diagnosis of, a generic, undiagnosed gastroenteritis.
Right, just a stomach bug.
Exactly. But today, the genetic test flags the parasite instantly, adding a confirmed case to the federal database.
So the tracking technology really is vastly superior now. But even with better testing accounting for the higher numbers, the industry's track record is still under intense scrutiny. I mean, Taylor Farms has a history here.
They do. Investigative journalists and Reddit users quickly surfaced past incidents. Taylor Farms was linked to a very similar Cyclospora outbreak back in 2013. And furthermore, they were identified as the supplier linked to the massive E. coli outbreak in McDonald's slivered onions in 2024.
And when you combine a repetitive track record of massive contamination events with an opaque recall process using decoded acronyms, public frustration inevitably boils over into mistrust.
Naturally.
In the Reddit threads we looked at, that mistrust rapidly morphed into political theorizing. Users began blaming government funding cuts, specifically pointing to the DOGE downsizing of the CDC surveillance labs last year. Other users leaned into political figures like RFK Jr. and his specific theories on agricultural safety protocols. And I really need to state clearly for you listening, we are not endorsing any of these political viewpoints, nor are we taking a side on the validity of those specific claims.
Absolutely not, yeah.
We are simply reporting on the fact that when a fundamental system like food safety appears to fail, it creates a vacuum of trust, and that vacuum is immediately filled by political finger-pointing and systemic skepticism.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that skepticism is a natural byproduct of witnessing the ultimate double-edged sword of the modern food system.
Okay, so...
Well, think about it. We possess molecular diagnostic technology capable of amplifying the DNA of a microscopic parasite and tracing it backward across 27 states to a specific plot of dirt in central Mexico. That is a marvel of modern science.
It really is incredible when you frame it that way.
Right. Yet simultaneously, our food supply chains are so hyper-consolidated that one minor sanitation failure on that single plot of dirt can infiltrate the nation's largest grocery retailer, the largest institutional food distributor, and multiple fast food empires within a matter of days.
Because efficiency demands centralization. I mean, if consumers expect cheap, fresh, pre-shredded iceberg lettuce available 365 days a year, the industry has to rely on massive central distributors like Cisco and colossal processors like Taylor Farms to handle that kind of volume.
But as the processing flumes demonstrate, when you centralize the processing, you centralize the risk. And then you distribute that risk globally.
Which brings the reality of the supply chain directly into your kitchen. The food sitting in your fridge is an active participant in this massively consolidated global web. We've seen today that simply washing your produce at the sink does not bypass the biology of a resilient parasite.
No, it doesn't.
We've seen how the mechanics of a commercial wash flume can cross-contaminate half the country. And we've seen how a single independent farm in central Mexico is inextricably linked to your local Walmart, your hospital cafeteria, and your late-night run to Taco Bell.
Understanding the mechanics of that web really permanently alters how you view a simple bag salad, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And I want to leave you with one final brand new thought to mull over, building on the sheer scale of the consolidation we've been discussing.
Okay.
The investigative reports were incredibly specific. The farm in central Mexico responsible for this entire crisis represented less than 1% of the U.S. iceberg lettuce supply. Less than 1%.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
Right. Yet, that microscopic fraction of the market was enough to trigger a 27-state public health crisis, hospitalize dozens of people, cause major corporations to proactively dump their inventory, and require journalists to decode federal warning lists just to keep the public safe. So if a farm supplying less than 1% of a crop can induce this level of systemic chaos, what happens when a consolidated facility responsible for 10 or 20% of a staple crop experiences a biological failure? Are our hyper-efficient, centralized food distribution networks actually our greatest, most fragile vulnerability?
That is the exact question supply chain analysts are losing sleep over right now.
Something to think about the next time you're standing in the produce aisle.